It was late October when Rachel, a high school sophomore in Ohio, agreed to stay after hours to help her history teacher organize old documents in the library basement. The place was rarely visited, dusty, dimly lit, and filled with boxes stacked like crooked towers. Students often whispered that the basement had been closed for years after a janitor supposedly died down there in the 1980s, but Rachel never believed it. She laughed at ghost stories. Still, when she descended those creaky wooden stairs, the silence felt heavier than she expected, almost pressing against her chest. Her teacher, Mr. Collins, had briefly gone upstairs to grab more folders, leaving Rachel alone. She set a box on the table, brushing dust off the lid, and began pulling out faded papers. That's when she heard it, the sound of footsteps circling the shelves in the far corner. She froze, listening hard. "Mr. Collins," she called, but no answer came. The air felt strangely colder, and a musty smell like mildew mixed with something sour drifted through the room. Rachel tried to shake it off, convincing herself it was just the old pipes or maybe the building settling. But when she returned to sorting, a whisper echoed from the dark aisle between the shelves. It wasn't words exactly, more like someone exhaling her name, long and drawn out. Her skin prickled. She stood up, her eyes fixed on the shadows. Just then, the overhead light flickered and buzzed, throwing the basement into brief darkness. She felt movement, something darting past her peripheral vision, but when the light steadied, nothing was there. Heart pounding, she hurried toward the stairs, deciding to wait for Mr. Collins upstairs. But when she reached the steps, her breath caught. A figure stood at the bottom, just beyond the glow of the single dangling bulb. It was tall, with shoulders too broad to belong to her teacher, and its head seemed bent at an unnatural angle. Rachel's legs trembled as she blinked, but in the space of a second, the figure vanished, leaving only the creak of the floorboards and that same faint whisper of her name. When Mr. Collins finally returned, Rachel was pale and shaking. She didn't tell him everything, just that she wasn't feeling well. But as she climbed out of the basement, she couldn't shake the thought that someone, or something, was still down there, hiding between the shelves, waiting for the next student left alone. Rachel tried to convince herself she had imagined it all, that maybe her nerves had just gotten the best of her. But the following week, the unease spread. She noticed other students whispering about strange things happening in the basement, missing supplies, books left in neat piles overnight when no one had been there, and one janitor swearing he saw someone moving around after the building was locked. The school brushed it off as pranks, but Rachel knew what she had seen that night, even if she didn't want to admit it. One afternoon, her best friend, Ashley, teased her about being scared. "You probably saw Mr. Collins' shadow," she laughed, flipping her long blonde hair. But Rachel's face stayed pale and serious. "It wasn't him," she muttered. It felt wrong. That only fueled Ashley's curiosity. She dared Rachel to sneak into the basement again, this time together, to prove it was just their imagination. Against her better judgment, Rachel agreed, not wanting to look like a coward. The following Friday, after football practice ended and the hallways emptied, the two slipped into the library. The building was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the air vents and the occasional slam of a locker from some lingering athlete. They crept down the narrow basement stairs, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the shadows. Dust swirled in the air, and the smell Rachel remembered, mildew and something rotting, was stronger than before. Ashley grinned nervously. "See? Just a creepy basement. Nothing more." She swung the light around, illuminating the shelves of outdated encyclopedias and forgotten yearbooks. But when they reached the far corner, the air shifted. The beam of the flashlight flickered, then dimmed as though something was draining its battery. Ashley slapped the side of it. "Cheap batteries," she scoffed, but her voice was tight. Then came the sound again, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the aisle behind them. Both girls froze. "Hello?" Ashley called, her bravado cracking. No reply. Instead, the whisper Rachel had heard before drifted out of the darkness. "Rachel, drawn out, low, and filled with malice. Rachel grabbed Ashley's arms so tightly her nails dug into her skin. The flashlight cut out completely, plunging them into blackness. Ashley fumbled with her phone, turning on the screen for a bit of light. That's when Rachel saw it, two pale hands reaching out from between the shelves, fingers long and too thin, stretching toward them. She screamed, pulling Ashley back toward the stairs. They scrambled, their shoes slipping on the dusty floor. The air seemed to grow heavier with each step, pressing down on them as though the basement itself wanted to hold them there. Halfway up the stairs, Rachel risked a glance back. In the glow of Ashley's phone, she caught sight of the figure again. It was clearer this time, its head still bent at that unnatural angle, eyes dark pits with no shine, its body jerking in movements that looked both human and broken, as though its joints weren't working right. It lurched forward, reaching for the steps. Rachel screamed again, shoving Ashley up toward the door. They burst into the library, slamming the basement door shut behind them. Both were trembling, gasping for breath, too terrified to speak for several minutes. Ashley's phone slipped from her hand, the cracked screen still glowing faintly on the carpet. When she finally whispered, "What the hell was that?" Rachel had no answer. From that night on, Rachel refused to enter the library after dark. Ashley, once the fearless skeptic, wouldn't even joke about it anymore. But the strangest part came days later, when the two returned to their lockers before class. Tucked inside Rachel's books was a folded piece of yellowed paper. In jagged handwriting, it read, "You can't leave me down here." The note in Rachel's locker gnawed at her mind like a splinter she couldn't pull out. She hadn't shown it to anyone but Ashley, and even Ashley begged her to throw it away. "It's some sick prank," she said, her voice unsteady. "Probably a senior messing with us. Just forget it." But Rachel couldn't. She knew what she had seen in that basement, those hands, that bent head, those hollow eyes. And now it knew her name. For days, she tried to act normal, going to class, eating lunch with friends, pretending she wasn't constantly glancing over her shoulder. But little things kept happening. Her backpack would be unzipped when she swore she hadn't touched it. She'd hear faint footsteps behind her in empty hallways. Sometimes, when she turned quickly, she'd catch the faintest glimpse of a shadow disappearing around a corner. Worse, she began waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced she heard whispering in her bedroom. One evening, after another sleepless night, Rachel decided to search for answers. She dug into the school's history, something most kids would never bother with. Old newspapers online told her what she needed to know. In the early 1980s, a janitor named Samuel Lorne had worked at the school. Students often described him as off, a quiet, awkward man who lingered too long in hallways and sometimes stared at kids in ways that made them uncomfortable. Rumors swirled about him following students home. Then, one night, Samuel vanished. The official story was that he quit and left town. But the basement had been closed off not long after, and students whispered that his body was never found. Rachel's stomach twisted. Could the thing she saw be connected to him? The bent head, the unnatural movements, was it his ghost, or something worse, something trapped in the school? She debated telling Mr. Collins, but what would she say? "I think your library basement is haunted by a dead janitor." No one would believe her. That Friday, Ashley cornered her at lunch. "We need to talk," she whispered, eyes wide. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a blurry photo, taken accidentally when her phone had fallen during their escape from the basement. The image was grainy, but clear enough to see the pale figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, its head bent and its hand outstretched. "Tell me that's fake," Ashley said, her voice shaking. Rachel's throat went dry. "It's not," she whispered. Ashley shoved the phone back into her pocket, her face pale. "Then we have to do something. If that thing's real, it's not just going to stop. It knows you." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. At around 2 a.m., she jolted awake, the sound of whispering louder than ever, not from a dream but from right outside her bedroom door. Her room was pitch black, save for the glow of her alarm clock. She held her breath, listening. A soft dragging noise moved across the hallway floor, followed by 3 slow knocks against her door. Knock. 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 Rachel's entire body went cold. She didn't move, didn't even blink. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably forming her name, Rachel. The door handle rattled once, twice, then stopped. After what felt like an eternity, the noise faded. She stayed frozen until dawn broke through her curtains. By morning, she was certain of one thing: whatever haunted the basement wasn't confined to the school anymore. It had followed her home. And the more she tried to ignore it, the closer it seemed to come. When Rachel confided in Ashley the next day, Ashley grabbed her hand. "We can't keep running from this," she said, trembling. "If we don't find out what it wants, it's going to keep coming, and next time, maybe it won't stop at the door." Rachel wanted to believe it was still just a prank, a coincidence, anything but real. But deep down, she knew the truth. Something had been left behind in that school, something angry, something unfinished. And now it had chosen her. Rachel and Ashley spent the next few days walking around school like ghosts themselves, constantly tired, constantly on edge. Rachel's nightmares were getting worse. In them, she saw the figure dragging itself across the library floor, its bent head jerking as if its neck had snapped long ago. She always woke with the sound of whispering still clinging to her ears, as though it had slipped out of the dream and into her room. By now, Ashley was desperate for answers too. One afternoon, they skipped their last class and headed into the public library downtown, where the older town records were kept. Hours passed as they combed through microfilm, yellowed newspapers, and forgotten files. Finally, they found it, an article buried in the back pages of a local paper from 1983. The headline read, "School Janitor Reported Missing After Alleged Confrontation with Students." The story was chilling. Several kids had accused Samuel Lorne of following them, though no charges were ever filed. On the night he disappeared, some students reportedly cornered him in the basement, mocking him, daring him to prove he wasn't a creep. Neighbors later claimed they heard shouting from the school, but by morning Samuel was gone. No body. No investigation. Just gone. Rachel's stomach churned as she read the last line. Authorities speculate Mr. Lorne may have left town voluntarily. But the details didn't add up. His car, his belongings, even his paycheck had all been left behind. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the school itself. That night, Rachel couldn't sit still. The whispers had returned, circling her room, seeping into her mind. She could almost feel cold fingers brushing against her hair as she lay in bed. Finally, just before midnight, she grabbed her phone and texted Ashley, "We have to go back. We need to end this." Ashley hesitated, but her reply came minutes later, "I'll meet you. Bring something to protect yourself." They snuck into the school through a side entrance Ashley's older brother once showed her. The building was silent, suffocatingly dark, the only sound the hum of distant pipes. Armed with flashlights and Rachel's father's old baseball bat, they made their way to the library. The basement door loomed in front of them like the open mouth of something waiting to swallow them whole. Every instinct in Rachel's body screamed to turn back, but she forced herself down the stairs, Ashley close behind. The air grew heavy the deeper they went, thick with the smell of rot. Dust swirled in their flashlight beams, and the shelves loomed like walls of a maze. Then came the sound again. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Echoing closer. The girls spun around, flashlights darting across the dark aisles. "Show yourself." Ashley shouted, though her voice cracked. The answer was a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Rachel." Rachel's heart thudded painfully. She tightened her grip on the bat, her flashlight trembling. From the shadows between two shelves, the figure stepped forward. This time there was no mistaking what they saw. Its skin was pale and stretched, its face half collapsed as if it had decayed, and its neck bent sharply to one side. The eyes were pits of shadow, empty yet fixed directly on her. Ashley let out a gasp, stumbling back, but Rachel forced herself to stand her ground. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The figure tilted its broken head, then lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the farthest corner of the basement. The motion was jerky, like bones grinding. Rachel followed the gesture with her eyes, and there, beneath a stack of old boxes, something caught the light, a glint of rusted metal. Her stomach turned. She realized it wasn't just metal, it was the edge of something buried beneath the concrete floor, half exposed. A chain, or maybe a lock. The figure's whisper grew louder, filling the basement until it felt like it was inside her skull. "Down here, with me." Rachel staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. For the first time, she understood. Samuel Lorne hadn't just disappeared. He had been left here, sealed in the basement, and now whatever remained of him wanted her to uncover the truth. But as the whispers rose into a deafening wail and the figure began dragging itself closer, Rachel realized uncovering the truth might come with a cost neither she nor Ashley was ready to pay. Ashley grabbed Rachel's arm, yanking her back toward the stairs. "Are you insane? We need to get out of here now." But Rachel couldn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the rusted chain glinting beneath the boxes. The figure, Samuel, or whatever was left of him, stood just beyond the shelves, head bent at its grotesque angle, whispering her name over and over like a chant. "It's pointing to something," Rachel whispered, her voice hollow. "He wants us to find it." Ashley shook her head violently. "I don't care what he wants. If we dig around down here, we're next." She tugged at Rachel again, but Rachel's feet felt glued to the floor. The whispers had shifted, they weren't just calling her name now. They were pleading. "Help me." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Rachel crouched and pulled the boxes aside. Dust choked the air, and Ashley hissed in panic. "Rachel, stop." But when the last box toppled, they both froze. The floor beneath wasn't solid concrete. A section of it had been broken and sloppily patched with old boards nailed across it, like a trapdoor. The chain wasn't attached to anything anymore, just left hanging. Rachel's stomach churned. This was it, the place Samuel had been left behind. Before she could process it, the figure moved. One jerky step forward, then another, the sound of its dragging foot echoing. Its whisper rose into a hiss, "Open it." Ashley screamed, fumbling with her flashlight. "No, no, no, we're leaving." She bolted for the stairs, but when she reached the door, it wouldn't budge. She yanked the handle until her knuckles went white. "Locked." "Rachel," she cried. "It won't open." Rachel felt her chest tighten. "Trapped." She turned back toward the trapdoor. The boards looked weak, as if they had been hammered in years ago and left to rot. Her hands shook as she lifted the bat and slammed it against the wood. The first hit echoed through the basement like thunder. The figure let out a guttural sound, half moan, half growl. Splinters flew as she struck again. Ashley abandoned the door and rushed to help her, both of them pounding at the boards. Each hit brought the stench of decay stronger, like something old and wet rising from beneath. Finally, one plank snapped loose, revealing a gap. The beam of Rachel's flashlight cut into the space below, and she screamed. A skull, gray and crumbling, stared up at her. The bones were half-rotted, tangled in scraps of uniform cloth. Shackles still bound the wrists, chains rusted deep into the dirt. Samuel Lorne had never left. He had been buried alive in the basement, locked beneath the floorboards by the very students who tormented him. The figure let out a shriek so loud the lights overhead exploded, plunging them into darkness. Rachel felt the sound vibrate through her bones, rattling her teeth. She dropped the bat and clutched her ears. The air turned icy, their breaths visible in the pitch black. Ashley's voice cracked in terror. "Oh my God, Rachel, what do we do?" Rachel forced herself to look into the gap again. The bones seemed to tremble, as though the discovery had awakened something fully. The whispers shifted from pleading to furious. They laughed. They mocked. "They left me. Now you know. Now you stay." Suddenly, invisible hands clamped onto Rachel's shoulders, freezing her in place. Her skin burned with cold. She thrashed, but the grip only tightened. Ashley screamed and swung the broken plank wildly into the dark. There was a sickening crack, and for a split second, the grip loosened. Rachel stumbled back, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The figure had reappeared at the edge of the shelves, its head twitching violently, as if struggling between rage and release. For one terrible moment, Rachel thought it would drag her down into the pit. But then it froze, its hollow eyes fixed on the uncovered remains. The basement fell silent except for their ragged breathing. Slowly, the figure lowered its head. The whispers quieted into one final, breathless sigh, free. And then, just like that, it was gone. The air lightened, the smell of rot faded, and the basement was still again. The library door slammed open upstairs with a violent crash, as if whatever force had locked it had finally lifted. Ashley grabbed Rachel, pulling her toward the stairs. "We're done," she said, her voice raw. "We're never coming back here. Ever." Rachel stumbled up the steps, glancing back only once. The broken boards gaped open, exposing the truth Samuel Lorne had carried for decades. His body was no longer hidden, his secret no longer sealed away. But even as she reached the top and the cool night air hit her face, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. Some things, once uncovered, never really go back to sleep. And in the quiet corners of the school, in the dark stretches of hallways where the lights flickered too long,